Good morning. My name is Richard Waddell, and it's Sunday, February 7th. I would like to welcome you to today's service of the North Chapel in Woodstock, Vermont. Last Sunday we had our annual meeting, and it was great seeing so many faces that we haven't seen in months and months. Thank you so much for joining us for that important meeting. Today, Leon's reflection is titled, "Excuse Me, Mr. Dragon." It should be interesting. In honor of Laura Foley and her wonderful dogs that you see every Sunday, I would like to read the following poem. It's titled, "Yellow Lab Outside the Coffee Shop" by Greg Watson. The yellow lab outside the coffee shop today cannot sit still, but instead radiates the ever-expectant energy of 1,000 hummingbirds. Tail sweeping back and forth across the gray-littered sidewalk. Sits without touching the ground, knowing that at any moment, the one who matters most will emerge, slip his worn leash from the bench, and the day will suddenly fall into place. Every sound, sight, and aroma discovered anew, the sun thrown everywhere at once, with a cool lake of shadow following, as if he had somewhere to go. Our hymn this morning is "We Are a Gentle, Angry People." Please join us in singing.
Hello, my name is Laura Foley, and I'm speaking to you from the very snowy woods of Pomfret, Vermont, on the tail end of a nice big snowstorm we've had. I wanted to read you a poem which is reflecting, it's a new poem I've written about my father and his experience during the war, during World War II, and his experience in a prison camp. He was also a doctor. 2 words. 2 words for my dad, the man who smuggled quinine to his men in prison camp. 2 words for his pre-war years on Yangtze riverboats, studying Mandarin and tropical disease. Who smuggled quinine to his men in prison camp while their captors died, enraging the commander. Studying Mandarin and tropical disease. You see, Dad endured while their captors died, enraging the commander. Water drops to the head and near starvation. You see, Dad endured yet never betrayed his friend and quinine source. Water drops to the head and near starvation. His friend, a Chinese workman. You see, Dad endured. Dr. Foley kept the secret through interrogation. His friend, a Chinese workman. And the resulting coma. Dr. Foley kept the secret through interrogation. There are 2 words for the kind of person Dad was, and the resulting coma, both beginning with H. There are 2 words for the kind of person Dad was, 2 words for my dad, the man who was a healer first.
If you're afraid of something, take a deep breath, soften your belly, and turn toward it. Good morning. Good morning and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. My name is Leon Dunkley, and I serve here as minister at North Universalist Chapel Society, or North Chapel, here in Woodstock, Vermont. Today is Sunday, February the 7th, and the title of this morning's reflection is Excuse Me, Mr. Dragon. It is about taking a deep breath and softening our belly and turning toward our fears. Perhaps the biggest fear, the biggest boundary, the biggest threshold in this month when we're reflecting on thresholds. That threshold that lay between here and the hereafter. So to all souls, I say good morning. It is good to be together. Effortlessly, they say. The sky holds the universe in its embrace. It's all right here. If only we are brave enough to see it, but we are not always brave. We don't see the all of things sometimes. We don't see everything. Sometimes there are monstrous impediments in our way. Sometimes there are dragons. How do we get the dragons to stand down? How do we encourage them to get out of the way of life? Now, I've been reflecting on this subject, and as I thought about it, I was reminded of something that happened way back in 1987. I had been elected to lead a youth workshop, a week-long conference at Star Island. Star Island is a camp and conference center that's located 9 miles off the coast of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's a beautiful place. And when I was going there when I was much younger, we would go to these conferences and maybe 120 kids would show up all at once. Here's a picture of what that conference looked like. It's a fun memory for me. We were gangly and awesome and fabulous, and many of the people in that photograph are still very, very dear to me now. Anyway, it was an honor to spend a year trying to figure out how to lead that conference, how to gather the strongest and most talented leaders that I knew to plan workshops and to organize trainings, and to prepare to counsel the 120 campers that were going to show up that June. I gathered a great staff. Don Schoenwolf, who was my local advisor, who I grew up with in Lincroft, New Jersey, he was going to lead a Taoism workshop. Maggie Sevier was going to lead the women's circle again. She's a very strong leader, very quiet, but so charismatic. I knew that anything she did was going to be powerful. And then Jocko suggested what he would want to do. This was kind of a buzzkill for me. It scared me a bit. Jocko said that he wanted to lead a week-long workshop on the topic of death. I was hoping that he was kidding. I was afraid of the subject at the time. I'm still afraid of it now. I can feel the nervousness in my spine when I talk about this. So to be honest, that quote in the beginning about softening your belly and turning toward it was coaching for me to be able to deal with this subject. So if you sense a nervousness in me, it's real. This is a hard topic for me. I've gotten better at it over time, but it's really hard. So there I was, listening to Jocko saying that he wanted to lead a week-long workshop on this topic. I thought he was crazy at the time. I mean, I thought to myself, who in their right mind goes away on vacation as a teenager, as a young adult, and chooses to spend the week reflecting on the topic of death? I didn't say anything at the time. I probably didn't have to. What I was feeling was probably written on my face. The thing that I remember most about what he said and about the workshop that he was planning was that reflecting on the topic of death can encourage the deeper living of life. I'll never forget that he said that. Reflecting on the topic of death encourages the deeper living of life. I am still, in some ways, very afraid of this topic, but not like I used to be. Now, I didn't take the workshop that Jocko offered back in 1987, but I've been reflecting on it ever since. For these past 33 years or so. You know, a lot can happen in 33 years. So I was afraid of the topic because I was afraid of the experience of grief. I didn't want to face that. I really couldn't separate the two. I didn't know how. But things get easier over time. We grow. We get wiser when we are ready. Sogyal Rinpoche begins a book called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying in this way, with these words. He says, "For all of its technological achievements, modern Western society has no real understanding of death, or what happens in death, or after death. People today are taught to deny death, they were taught that it means nothing but annihilation and loss. That means that most of the world either lives in denial of death or in terror of it, like I am. Even thinking about death, for some, is considered morbid. Many people believe that even mentioning the word is to wish it upon ourselves. Now that was me, unfortunately. It still is me now to some extent. In almost all of these measures, I was in denial. I was terrified. I didn't want to talk about death. I could go into the woods and see it all around me. I could see the fallen trees and the new growth coming. I could handle it psychologically, but emotionally, that was much tougher for me. I can't imagine that my feelings weren't obvious. But you know what they say we grow old by inches. I have slowly matured over time, and I'm glad that we grow old by inches, is because inches is all I've got. I am narrowly better and wiser than I was before, and only because I have stopped denying that which is universally common. Death is not particular. I remember when I thought that it was. I remember when I was brought back to my senses. My minister in North Carolina did this service for me. His name was Arvid Straube, and I so dearly love this man. He was preaching on the topic of fear, much like I am today, and the vehicle, the idea, the concept that he used was his fear about the AIDS epidemic, the epidemic that was plaguing us at that time. And he went to the pulpit and he confessed his fear. He said, I was afraid of AIDS. I was terribly afraid of it, he said. I was afraid of it because AIDS is a sexually transmitted terminal condition. I was afraid right up until the point that I realized that life is a sexually transmitted terminal condition. And if I am not afraid of life, why need I be afraid of AIDS? This realization did not alleviate the dangers of that disease, but it did lessen the fears that I attached to it. And lessening those fears is still interesting to me. Pushing back the dragons and asking them to get out of the way. When we are able to face our fears, they do not go away exactly, but they do become more accessible to us. We can talk to them. Instead of being chased away from the most meaningful thresholds of our lives, chased away by the fire-breathing monsters that fear creates, we can face these monsters and we can appeal to them. We can say, excuse me, Mr. Dragon, but you're standing in my way. After 9/11, when the world seemed newly dangerous back in 2001, newly dangerous, that is, to Americans, Arundhati Roy spoke of the importance of turning to face our fears. She said, I think poetically, since it is September 11th, she was speaking on September 11th of 2002, on the 1-year anniversary of that terrible day. Since it is September 11th that we are talking about, she said, perhaps it is in the fitness of things that we remember what this date means, not only for those who lost their loved ones in America this last year, but to those in other parts of the world to whom this date has long held significance. This historical dredging is not offered as an accusation or a provocation, but just to share the grief of history, to thin the mists a little, to say to the citizens of America in the gentlest and most human way, welcome to the world. Now, the world is a pretty big place, big enough for all of us to meet, and herein lay the challenge, doesn't it? This idea that all of us meet here. This challenge is made more difficult by fear and by grief. It's made more difficult by denial and by naive joylessness. That's where I was when Reverend Jocko made his proposal, this week-long workshop on the topic of death at Star Island. I was in a very lonely place at that time. I could not cross over into a more beautiful garden. I was filled with fear. I was afraid of the power of that threshold, of my own maturity. I was afraid because, as far as I could tell, there was a great big fire-breathing dragon that was standing in my way, and I couldn't get by, and I didn't really understand the nature of the threshold. I was afraid of losing more in life than I already had. Now, it's common to think of thresholds as places of transitions, as markers between this place and the next. They are that. but they are also places where you can stand and experience not the transition, but that moment of being in between. Not crossing over between what has been and that which will be, but standing right on the balance and holding those oppositions, the oppositions between the past and the future that is the present, the oppositions between life and death, which is that stunning, excellent experience of living in this moment in time. This is the simple nature of the world. This is the Buddha nature of the world. What is Buddha nature? Buddha nature is a beautiful and beautifully elusive concept. It is the goal of spiritual practice. It is the deepest truth of meditation. All beings are Buddhas, the sacred books tell us. But this truth is obscured by incidental stains. When we lose the stains, when they've been removed, we sort of rise, we flower into Buddhahood. Buddha nature is that unstained and unstainable essence within us that is forever capable of the highest things. Now, in order to experience this, we have to face our fears. Can't turn away from them. We have to face them compassionately, gently, and humanly, and grow just a little bit. Just as the lotus flower grows from that which lay beneath it. So out of the rot, we rise. Out of the brokenness and out of the decay, out of the spoil and out of the ruin, out of the dissolution of things. Out of all of this grows a lovely flower that is beautiful and free. The rising that is life releases us and ties us together at the same time. It is this relationship between opposite forces that yields the fruits and flowers of life. This is what we discover by standing on the threshold, neither departing from what was nor stepping fully into that which will be, but by holding both in balance and in perfect opposition. As is expressed in the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, according to the wisdom of Buddha, we can use our lives to prepare for death. In the Buddhist approach, life and death are seen as one whole, where death is the beginning of another chapter of life. Death is a mirror in which the entire meaning of life is reflected. Now, back in 1987, this is what Jocko Tenhove was trying to explain to me, but I wasn't ready for it. I was afraid. Still am. I couldn't listen. I could not yet face the dragon that was on the threshold of my life. I was afraid of what it might do to me. Now, many of you may know North Chapel has been offering a class online. Many of us have been meeting in a Zoom call. The class is called Learning and Thinking Critically in Challenging Times. We met for the second time last night, and we are halfway through our process. We had a lively discussion and a debate, a spirited one, about civil disobedience. Not the choice of action, but the famous essay by Henry David Thoreau. He was one who learned to think for himself. He made that choice. He could have cowered, but he chose not to, even though he was afraid of things. He chose to face the dragons on the threshold of his life. He was not afraid. He was not limited by his fears like others were. Thoreau wrote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." I wonder if quiet desperation is what happens to us sometimes, when we cannot face the dragons that we create for ourselves, when we live inside the fear that others create for us. Now, I was afraid back in 1987 at Star Island. I was afraid even to talk about the subject of death. And I didn't tell anyone about it, although I'm sure I failed to hide my feelings. For a time, for quite a long time, I was quietly desperate about the subject. I wasn't curious like Jaco Tenhove was. I wasn't insightful like Sungyal Rinpoche. The subject of death filled me with anxiety and with dread, but it doesn't have to, something I've been learning over time. Here I am speaking outside of the context of this pandemic. Of course, I am driven by its urgency, confronted by its costs, but I am standing quite apart from it in a way, standing alongside of it, as it were. I am thinking about the nature of this threshold, this change, this metamorphosis that we are experiencing as an American society and as a world. And I am calling upon Sungyal Rinpoche for wisdom and for guidance. And he is insightful. I am learning so much from him. I am more at peace for what I learn. According to the book that he wrote, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, the purpose of reflecting on death is to make a real change in the depth of your heart. Looking into death needn't be a frightening thing, needn't be morbid. Why not reflect on death when you are really inspired, relaxed, and comfortable, when you are lying on your bed or are on holiday? Or when you are listening to music that particularly delights you? Why not reflect on it when you are happy, in good health, confident, and full of well-being? Don't you notice that there are particular moments when you are naturally moved toward introspection? Work with them gently. These are the moments when you can go through a powerful experience and your whole worldview can change quickly. What a concept. How fascinating. Even the dragons agree. The dragons that moments earlier might have frightened us. It turns out that the dragon is not so scary after all, not nearly as monstrous as I have made him in my mind. When we are lucky, there are gifts and there are benefits of chasing the dragon, depending, of course, on the nature of the dragon. Now, dragons in modern society are things of legend. They're mythical. They are ultimate guardians. They station themselves at the threshold between what we know and know not of. Hic sunt draconis was the Latin phrase commonly inscribed on medieval maps of the world. Translated, the phrase, "Here be dragons," was the phrase that marked the boundary line, the threshold between the safe and the dangerous waters. They mark places of fear, sometimes rational fear, other times irrational fear, depending on the nature of the dragon. So, which nature do we experience? What do the dragons mean in the context of our lives? Sungyal Rinpoche suggests that our deepest fears are like the dragons guarding the treasures, the deepest treasures of life. He was quoting Rilke when he said it. He was quoting a letter from a young poet. Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us, in its deepest essence, is something helpless that wants our love." These are the kinds of dragons that we should soften our bellies and turn to face. If we don't face them, we are at risk of being ruled by them, and not so much by them as the fears that we create in their name. Is this what we want for ourselves? I hope not, and I don't think so. James Baldwin would say, if you're afraid of something, take a deep breath, soften your belly, and turn toward it. Don't fight the dragon, but don't fear it either. Move through fear and see what the dragon has to teach. See what the dragon has to show us of the deepest treasures of life. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.
I can see the river Jordan, river deep and river wide.
I can see its muddy water. I must cross to the other side.
I have walked through nights of darkness as I traveled on my way. Now the morning sun is rising. I can see a brighter day. I've come a long way on this journey. Now here on Jordan's banks I stand. I followed a road that leads to freedom. Now I'm bound for the promised land. I have climbed the highest mountain. I have walked the valley below. When I cross that river Jordan, then to heaven I will go. I can see the path before me.
I can see the river run.
When I cross the river Jordan, then my journey